Today's webinar titled AWS Security Fundamentals and Preparing for a Career in Cloud Security. In just a moment, I'm going to hand things over to our featured presenters today, Bill Shin and Sarah Curry. Bill Shin is Senior Principal, Office of the CISO for AWS, and Sarah Curry is Security Consultant for AWS Professional Services. Bill is a Senior Principal Architect with AWS Security and leads the worldwide technical field for security and compliance at AWS. Bill has been with AWS since 2012 and works in the Office of the CISO. And prior to AWS, he spent over 12 years managing and leading information security operations and architecture initiatives at some of the largest US financial institutions, such as US Bank and JP Morgan Chase. Sarah Curry is a 5-time AWS certified ProServe security consultant who has security expertise in the areas of AWS security, HIPAA compliance, and Amazon managed services. She's a member of the security technical field community and offers technical guidance to customers on AWS solutions that streamline their security processes. And she enables their workflows to maintain a high standard of compliance and agility. Sarah's also an advocate for mentorship and increasing the presence of underrepresented individuals in the cloud security space. Excuse me. We're extremely honored to welcome Bill and Sarah today. We know you'll get a lot from their presentation. Bill and Sarah, you now have the floor.
Thanks so much, Mike. We really appreciate it. And thanks so much to New Horizons for inviting us to speak today. Bill and I are very excited about it, so we'll go ahead and get started. So moving into introductions, Mike just did a great job, so I won't spend much time on this, but Bill and I are excited to speak with you today and help you learn more about AWS security and how you can start your cloud journey. So today for our agenda, some different things that we will go through. We want attendees to learn the basics of AWS security and become familiar with resources to accelerate your career in cloud security. So we'll start with an overview of the state of cloud security and some different aspects to different paths that you could potentially take. And we want you to gain an understanding of some top security topics that are top of mind for CISOs and enterprises as they look at security and compliance today for their organizations. We'll also dive into the basics of AWS security. So the core security pillars that you need to know to be successful in the cloud and as you start your journey. And we want you to also have some access to resources, so different ways that you can access New Horizons trainings, as well as reaching towards your certifications for AWS, and so that you can really start on your journey with learning the cloud. And then we'll also conclude with open Q&A, so if you have any questions, but essentially we want you to leave this session having a tangible understanding of cloud security and the core security pillars, and also what is in demand with cloud security professionals today. So we're going to start with a quick poll. So if we can launch the poll here. So it's up now. So where are you in your cloud security? So we're launching this poll because we want to see kind of essentially tailoring the conversation according to where you are on your learning path. So we have beginner, you're excited to learn, the basics of cloud security. You possibly already have a job in cloud security and just want to learn more, or maybe you're a cloud security subject matter expert and you're just always continually learning. So if you could take a second to answer that poll, that would be great.
Thanks, Sarah. We'll give it a, 15 or 20 seconds or so for folks to respond to the survey, and we'll kind of read the results and let everybody know where they're at.
Sounds good. And just so everyone knows, there's no wrong answer. We're just wanting to look to see how deep we should go into different topics and where everyone is today. So it looks, sorry, go ahead, Bill.
It looks like we have about 63% who are beginners and excited to learn, and about 38% know the basics of cloud security. So I think we're starting with the fundamentals in the right place. And awesome. 0% in the last two categories there. So pretty new audience, and excited to share things with you today. Thanks.
Awesome, sounds good. Thanks so much, everyone, for responding. That will help us just to understand where everyone is, and we're so excited that you're interested in learning. We always need more folks in cloud security, and kind of transitioning into that topic. So we're going to talk about the state of cloud security and why it's a really good time to start learning now. If you've ever heard of cybersecurity ventures, they do a lot of polling, essentially on what the jobs are looking like for unfilled cybersecurity jobs. And they've seen that it's grown by 350%, so 1 million positions in 2013 to 3.5 million in 2021. So for the first time in a decade, cybersecurity skills gaps leveling off, and they're going to see about 3.5 million openings in 2025. So never a better time to get started than now. So we're so excited for you to start your journey, because there's only going to be a bigger need for cybersecurity, especially as different aspects like security and compliance, ransomware, and zero trust models that we'll get into in a few minutes continue to grow for different enterprises. And then additionally, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics also projects that security information security analyst is the 10th fastest growing occupation in over a decade. So again, a lot of companies are collecting more and more data, and they're needing ways to analyze this and look at how they can secure it and also be in compliance with different regulations and industry standards. And so this need is growing more and more. And we can see that a lot of these positions do not require certifications for the entry level to mid-level positions, because employers want to cast a wider net for candidates. We will talk about certifications and how that can give you an advantage, but it is just good to know that companies really need these positions. So it's a good time to just get started in your learning path. And then also, when you think about cloud security, there's so many different types of roles that you could potentially get involved in. So there's the security operations center analyst. So if you're looking at different operations in terms of security, there's security technical writers. So if you love reading and writing technical blogs about how you can improve your security within organizations, this is a career option for you. There's also compliance officers. So maybe you're really interested in how you can help people protect their healthcare information. That could be a different pathway you could take. There's also penetration testing, which essentially is looking at different vulnerabilities in a system and how far you can get with those vulnerabilities and looking at how to mitigate them. That's a potential career option that you could take. Security architect. So if you want to help companies and customers architect their systems in a secure manner, this could be an option for you. Also security analyst, looking at all the different types of data with logging and monitoring. Security engineer, security consultant. So I'm a security consultant, and what we do is we work with customers to help implement their security solutions and also help enable different companies to make sure that they have those skills once we leave. And also security TPM. So you don't necessarily need to be engineering and building things to be in the security role. If you love project management or program management and you have an interest in security, there's a lot of different paths. And these are just some that were top of mind. These are not all of them. So it's a really exciting time for security and getting involved in all of these different options. So I'm going to pass it over to Bill so he can talk about some of the current top of mind security topics in the industry.
Thanks, Sarah. Sorry I couldn't be on camera today, folks. Just not working out so well with the camera, but we'll start. I spend a lot of time, like Sarah does, talking to customers of AWS and chief information security officers, chief risk officers, compliance officers, all kinds of roles similar to those Sarah just mentioned. And we tend to kind of capture trends about what's hot and what are customers asking about. You've probably heard about ransomware. Just to quickly define it, it's basically, malicious software that takes control of a computer, and, someone has to pay a ransom to unlock it, either cryptographically or pay a ransom to avoid some bad actor disclosing data that's on a particular computer. You've probably seen this in the mainstream media. It's everywhere from the White House and other foreign governments, to the agencies and industries tasked with implementing all these recent executive orders. To corporate boardrooms, to the nightly news. From our perspective, things haven't changed that much in terms of threats and vectors, but still 57% of ransomware victims paid out last year. So it's really encouraging cyber criminals to increase their attacks. The thing that has changed, malware and misconfigurations of software is not a new thing. It's it's really been monetized. So with cryptocurrency and other ways of monetizing it, the attackers are getting a little bit more potent in their attacks. Also, there's more sophisticated tools these days. So there's automation around some of these things to take advantage of, widespread common vulnerabilities in software. And so they're getting a bit more malicious. It's definitely top of mind. But the thing from our perspective is that these threats really haven't changed. It's really about prevention. Really requires a renewed investment in the fundamentals. So not just from the chief information security officer, but all parts of an organization. Security needs to be part of everyone's job and needs to be top of mind. So we'll talk a little bit about our perspective on preventing ransomware. If we can advance the slides, and we'll talk about some of the kind of the key fundamentals here. Really, again, this hasn't particularly changed in terms of how you can prevent it. It's security awareness is the #1 defense against ransomware. We encourage personally relevant, very accessible, inclusive, and approachable guidance for everyone, and it helps people identify suspicious activity, simple things like phishing, and letting people know where they can go to get help. So if you work at a company that has a help desk or a security office, just making sure that people are aware of where to go when they can get help. The other thing is training. Most organizations have some kind of training around security awareness. Many organizations do not, particularly small ones, and many of the large enterprises we work with are just not happy with the security awareness training they have. Back in October, kind of in conjunction with some executive orders from the administration, we launched our own security awareness training. So the things we use internally in Amazon, we made available. We can post the link in the chat. It's learnsecurity.amazon.com, and so we make our own security awareness training free to the public. And we'd love to partner with you and your organizations on making this even better. So please provide us feedback. The group of folks who are attending this and taking training are encouraged to start their careers in cybersecurity. It's kind of a community effort. We all are in this together and sharing information about how to become more aware of security risks and how to get help in every sector. Together we can move this forward. Strong authentication. So many of you have a bank or a public email account or a critical website that you use for your financial information or your healthcare information. Most of those require some kind of two-factor authentication. That might be a text message, it might be a key that you touch, might be a token that has a one-time code. If you're an AWS customer, we announced in August to make multi-factor authentication free to eligible customers that need them. You can also use those tokens on other websites around the internet. But definitely it's something to invest in, is just learning how to use multi-factor authentication in conjunction with probably a username and password. But really that second factor is kind of a key thing that really does a good job of preventing ransomware. So if there's malware on a computer, and in order to exploit that, they might be able to get passwords. But if you have another factor of authentication that's physical, then it prevents a lot of the attacks that we're seeing in the industry around ransomware. Patching, everybody gets warnings on their computer or their phone. It's just important to continue patching. It's one of those fundamental things that seem, surprisingly hard to get right. But if you're focusing on, a couple things, patching is definitely one of them, and continue to invest in that. Configuration management is another one. So making sure that as you configure software or cloud resources or networks, being familiar with the correct configuration management is super important. And then finally, data recovery. So a lot of this, ransomware attacks are targeted at eliminating data or taking control of data and encrypting it where the user can no longer get control of it. But if you have a good data recovery strategy, so backing up and being able to restore that, that's a common strategy for preventing the impact of ransomware. We can move on. The other trend we're hearing a lot about is zero trust architectures. So definitely if you're new to the security space, something to be searching on and really familiarizing yourself with. It's really a trend that we're hearing a lot about. Most people think about zero trust in the context of end users, like I mentioned before. You have your employees or customers or end users using strong multi-factor authentication, and usually in conjunction with some sort of posture assessment. So if you're connecting to a corporate network, you might authenticate using a username and password and a multi-factor authentication token, and then some kind of endpoint that you connect to checks the posture of your device, whether that's a phone or a computer, and making sure it's patched to expectations. configure with the right tools for threat management. We have partners like CrowdStrike and others in AWS. That's one example, but being able to test the posture of the endpoint. It allows you basically to put zero trust. The goal of it is to put enterprise applications really directly on the internet without exposing the entire internal network or trying to achieve least privilege using the traditional means that were done with firewalls and VPN pools. So it's really a breakthrough in terms of productivity, especially in the last couple of years during a lot of remote work. Most enterprises are embracing the zero trust technologies or trends and architectures to enable their business users to access internal resources directly over the internet. So it's quite a big trend, but it's much more than when you think about just trusting devices like a laptop or a phone. There's all kinds of things in cloud architectures and modern software like microservices. There's things like operational technology, so the OT side of IT. As we look at truly connected world, things like refrigerators, factories, oil derricks, battlefields, satellites, all the things that every connected device now is on the internet, and being able to authenticate that securely is super important. So that's just one of the trends we're hearing about. AWS obviously has lots of services in this space, but zero trust kind of consists of a few things. Leveraging strong cryptography. So if you're transmitting data over the internet using modern protocols, strong authentication with MFA that we talked about, or between microservices, being able to issue secure credentials, ephemeral secrets, those kind of things to be able to strongly authenticate one service to another. Using digital signature protocols, so it's not just enough to have TLS or encrypted data in transit. It's important to actually sign each message you make to an API call or have digital signature protocols in place. Also leveraging modern transport layer security, like version 1.2 at least, and that's moving toward 1.3, and things like perfect forward secrecy, which prevent all kinds of novel attacks on cryptography. So those are kind of the fundamentals of putting services directly on the internet in a safe way. And it's very important to get familiar with these things as a new person in the security space. And finally, the evolving role of security has really moved up to the boardroom these days. It's not just something in the IT space. It's really most chief information security officers have direct lines to the board of directors for their companies. It's important culturally to make it sure that it's everybody's job, even if you're not in IT or software development or technology, making sure that security is understood by the business users, the end users, the citizens who use services. Secure by design is another trend we see a lot, where it's not just something you bolt on at the end. It's really something as you bake into software development and infrastructure deployments, things like networks and storage, putting that in there by design. AWS and others our partners like New Horizons make all kinds of resources available to get security early in the process of software development. And finally, it's important to contextualize it and make it directly important to people in their daily lives. So helping your end users, your customers, your staff really understand how security is important to their job, that earning trust with your customers, protecting data, and how that impacts the business outcomes of any enterprise or any public sector agency with a mission to serve the public. It's just important to frame the security conversation in a way where people can directly understand how it impacts them. So thanks. I think we'll kick it over to Sarah and talk about some AWS security basics.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Bill. And yeah, to dive a little deeper into what Bill was saying in terms of some of the top topics that a lot of folks have in mind for security in different organizations today. So moving into AWS security basics, these are some of the core pillars that you'll need to understand as you start your cloud career, whether it's specifically in security or in general, just foundational aspects that you need to know, because at AWS and a lot of companies are transitioning towards this idea of security is everyone's job. So we like to say at AWS that security is job zero, which essentially means that it is the top priority, and it's what we need to, like Bill said, bake into all of our different processes. And with AWS, a lot of our customers benefit from this architecture where we're baking security in, and we're making sure that we're satisfying different requirements, especially for highly regulated organizations. But we want to make sure that security is trickling down to all of our different customers so that they can benefit from that. And something that's really important to know as you move into cloud security is the shared responsibility model. This is one of the core foundational aspects of understanding security in the cloud. So as a foundational aspect, security and compliance, that is a shared responsibility between the cloud provider and the customer. So a lot of reasons why customers are moving to the cloud is due to the fact that some of the security controls are the responsibility of the cloud provider like AWS. So they don't need to worry about the physical security of their infrastructure, things like that. So in terms of the shared responsibility model, when we're looking at the different aspects you can see here in the slide. So essentially, AWS is helping to relieve the customer's burden of operating, managing, and controlling components from the host operating system and the virtualization layer down to the physical security of facilities which the services are operating in. Whereas the customer, you can see in blue, is assuming the responsibility and management of the guest operating system, other associated application software, and configuration of their different applications. So this is something that customers should really carefully consider what services they're choosing, because it's their responsibility to configure those and also secure their data. So when it comes to shared responsibility, you can see over on the left-hand side under customer and AWS. Under customer, it's responsibility of security in the cloud, and AWS is responsibility of security of the cloud. So if you're not familiar with this framework, a really good way to kind of take it to a real world model is think of a house, and AWS is the landlord. They own the house, they own the physical infrastructure, and ultimately they're responsible for the house, and the customer is the tenant. So they're in charge of everything inside, so the furniture, and also securing what's inside, so locking the doors and making sure that they are following the appropriate protocol to protect their furniture and anything inside the house. That's kind of just a basic way to think of cloud security and understanding who is responsible for what. But for a quick, fun little quiz, so this is just looking at AWS responsibility or customer responsibility, and feel free to play along. You can write these down and guess which one is either AWS's responsibility or the customer's. So for this first one, it's configuring security group rules, which determine which ports are open on the EC2 Linux instance. So again, security group, and making sure that those are closed off and not using the default rules. The next one is preventing packet sniffing at the hypervisor level. So if you remember, if AWS or the customer is responsible for the hypervisor level. And then the next one is patching the operating system with the latest security patches. So who is responsible for the OS and those security patching? Shredding disk drives before they leave the data center. So again, who's responsible for the physical data center? Is it AWS or the customer? And then next, securing the internal network inside the AWS data centers. And installing camera systems to monitor the physical data centers. So again, is AWS responsible for the physical data centers or the customer? And lastly, toggling on server-side encryption feature for S3 buckets. So who is responsible for securing their data in the cloud and providing that encryption for their objects in the cloud? So take just a quick second and finalize all your guesses, and I'll provide the answers in the next slide. So if it is blue, it's the customer's responsibility. If it's orange, it is AWS's. So I hope that was kind of a fun way to jog your memory about who's responsible for what in the shared responsibility model. But again, if you ever see anything about the physical data center, and securing that. That's always going to be AWS responsibility. And then again, with customers and responsibility in the cloud, going to be aspects in terms of securing their data and their applications and configuration management. Patching is a tricky one, I'll say, because that is a shared control in the sense of AWS is responsible for patching the underlying infrastructure, where the customer is responsible for patching any guest OS and any of the different services they're using. But this is kind of just a baseline foundational information that you should start to get to understand as you're learning cloud security. So moving into the core security pillars. So at AWS, we have the Well-Architected Framework, which is essentially a framework that we use to help customers understand what they need to look at in terms of different aspects such as security, performance, operations, different aspects like that. So we're going to dive specifically into security. And so some of these core aspects that you're really going to want to focus on while you're learning is identity and access management, data protection, infrastructure security, threat detection or logging and monitoring, and incident response. So I'll highlight some different AWS services as we go through these different core security pillars. So starting off with identity and access management. So if you ever hear IAM, that is the acronym that we commonly use to discuss identity and access management. And Gartner describes this as the discipline that enables the right individuals to access the right resources at the right times for the right reasons. So essentially, IAM allows you to implement a comprehensive access control on your AWS resources. So it's going to give you the ability to authenticate. So again, like Bill was talking about, making sure that you are who you say you are and using multi-factor authentication that I think pretty much everyone is used to these days. When you think about logging into your email and you might get a text token to enter that in to make sure it's you. With IAM, you're also looking at authorization and essentially making sure that the person or system has the right privileges to access the resource. And then finally also auditing, so making sure that you are logging every different types of API calls, so every type of allow and deny in the cloud, so that you can use that for troubleshooting and also auditing purposes. So when you think of IAM, this is a nice little chart to kind of think about how all three of these are working together in terms of authentication, authorization, and auditing. And when you think of IAM, it really is the backbone of your cloud deployment, because you do need to create permissions to be able to access any of your resources. And IAM is really critical in the sense that it helps you secure your different access to AWS resources. So again, who's authenticated and signed in, and who has authorized, so who has permissions to use these resources. And for some security best practices in the cloud that you might see in relation to IAM, one of the things that we talk about frequently is granting least privilege. So that just means that whoever is in the cloud, they only have access to permissions and resources that they need access to for their role. So if you have someone who's a compliance officer and they just need to see access to logs, you only grant them access to the logs they need. You don't also grant them access to EC2 instances. So making sure that you're using those least privilege. Also making sure that you're validating your policies and configuring strong password policies for your users. And like we've mentioned before, enabling MFA and not sharing access keys. So those are just some top level security best practices for IAM, but there's a lot more out there if you're interested specifically in diving into this. So for the next one is encryption, and this is a really important one for safeguarding important data. So a critical piece of all of your different systems and operating information systems is going to be looking at how you're encrypting your data either in transit or at rest, and making sure that you're protecting the data throughout its life cycle in your applications. So for data in transit, this is any data that is sent from one system to another. And this can include communication between resources within your workloads, as well as communications between other services or by your end users. So you're going to want to make sure that you're providing an appropriate level of protection for your data in transit. And you can use some different aspects that we have listed here, such as HTTPS, TLS that we had mentioned before with ransomware, and also zero trust, using a VPN, and also using SSH to access your EC2 instances. And there are specific controls that you're going to want to put in place for these, but these are kind of just over essentially the top level that you need to know for encryption in transit. And some different services that you could use in AWS for these are things like Amazon Certificate Manager, and also, again, the use of VPC flow logs so that you can look at all of the different audit logs that are coming through, so you can look at the traffic coming in and out. And then in terms of data at rest, this essentially, again, is making sure that you're protecting your data that persists in your storage for any duration in your workloads. This could be block storage like EBS, object storage with S3, databases, any IoT devices that you might be using, or any other types of storage that you might be using where data is being stored. So protecting this data at rest reduces the risk of any unauthorized access. So again, it's that layered security. So if someone on your team did misconfigure an S3 bucket and it was open to the world, but you had KMS, AWS KMS, which is key management services, implemented on that object, then again, it helps add that layer of security so you have defense in depth. So again, for some AWS resources that you can use to encrypt data at rest, AWS KMS, like I mentioned, Amazon S3 has some client-side encryption that you can use. There's also Cloud HSM that's commonly used for government agencies because it has very strict encryption rules. And then again, you can audit the use of these different encryption keys with AWS CloudTrail. So again, auditing very important to look at for troubleshooting and also for compliance reasons. So moving into infrastructure security, so some different aspects when it comes to looking at how you can protect your infrastructure as you're building out your virtual private cloud with VPC and different services that you have running. So some different aspects that you're going to want to keep in mind for protecting your compute resources. One is going to be performing vulnerability management. So again, this is looking at scanning your code, your infrastructure, and different dependencies for any vulnerabilities that you might have, and looking at threats and mitigation for those. So you might be familiar with AWS CloudFormation, which essentially is a way that you can create infrastructure as code and deploy these different templates. And you can use some different scanning tools such as CloudFormation Guard to essentially save you time and reduce the risk of human error when it comes to looking at configuration errors and scanning those. So those are some aspects that you can use with vulnerability management. You also want to make sure that you're reducing the attack surface by creating your own AMIs or AMIs, so Amazon Machine Images, and using EC2 Image Builder. So this is going to help you reduce your exposure to unintended access by hardening your operating systems and minimizing components, libraries, and externally consumable services that you're being put into use. And again, this is going to be very important so that you can make sure that you can also simplify the process and harden your AMIs when you're using that to build any new EC2 instances in the cloud. And again, help your team have specific configuration guidelines and security built in. You're also going to want to make sure that you're practicing least privilege on instances. So like we talked about with IAM, least privilege also applies for your resources, and making sure that only the individuals that need access to these instances have access to it, and also the permissions are least privilege as well. And then also implementing managed services that shift the responsibility to the cloud partner. So again, this kind of goes back to the shared responsibility model, where if you have certain services that are managed resources by the cloud provider. So with Amazon RDS, AWS Lambda, and Amazon ECS, it's going to reduce your security maintenance as part of the shared responsibility model. So again, that's why we had mentioned it's really important for the customer to look at which services that they're selecting, because the different responsibility shifts depending on what type of application AWS service they are selecting. And then lastly, automating your compute protection. So wanting to make sure that you automate any type of vulnerability management and management of resources. Automation is always going to be important, and it's going to help you save time so that you can have your engineers or security folks focusing on innovation rather than manually remediating small tasks. So again, it's also going to help reduce the risk of any human errors that you might have. And then also with infrastructure security, looking at the network side of things. So when you're looking at your VPC and how you can protect that, so some aspects are going to be creating network layers. So with different components like EC2 instances, Lambda functions, RDS database clusters, you're going to want to make sure that you're segmenting those into different layers with subnets. So you're going to want to make sure that you essentially are mitigating the impact with single layer configuration. And something that's important with all of those is also controlling traffic at all layers. So when you're architecting your network, you should make sure that you're looking at the connectivity requirements of each component. So you're not going to want to use the default rules that are set when you create a VPC automatically. You're going to want to make sure, again, that you're defining those specific IP addresses, inbound and outbound traffic rules for security groups and NACLs, and making sure that they are appropriate for your organization and for, again, least privilege that you're going to want to be implementing. You're also going to want to make sure that you're implementing packet inspection and protection. So if you're not familiar with this, this is inspecting and filtering your traffic at each layer. So for different components over any type of HTTPS based protocols, you might want to look at using a web application firewall. So AWS WAF is one of the services we have that you can monitor and block any HTTP requests, so when they're not secure, and it can match your rules depending on what you configure. So that's definitely something that's important that you can use. And there's also AWS Shield and Shield Advanced that can help protect from any types of DDoS attacks as well. And then lastly, automating your network protection. So again, automation is going to be something that's, again, going to save your team time and also reduce any risk of human error. And then additionally, a lot of the AWS services are more and more implementing machine learning. So looking at different anomaly detection and threat intelligence so that it can help pull in different current threats and provide mitigations to reduce the impact of any of these threats. So for example, with AWS WAF, there's security automation that you can pull into that will block any IP addresses that are from the known threat actors list. So lots of fun things to explore there. And moving into threat detection. So this has a lot to do also with logging and monitoring, but if you're not familiar with threat detection, it's the practice of analyzing the entirety of a security ecosystem and identifying any malicious activity that could compromise the network. So some different things that you would want to do with your team is building a threat detection strategy. So you want to identify all of the different types of assets and resources that you have, entry points, different types of actors, and include this in your architecture so that you understand your different list of threats. And then for each threat, you would want to go through and identify different mitigations that you could use as a security control for implementation. So for example, you could have a preventative security control that prevents any type of S3 bucket from being created without encryption. And that would help essentially mitigate specific types of threats. You could also have detective controls that could notify the team if there was a specific resource that was created without encryption, and that again can help you with identifying those threats and mitigating in a specific time. And then another important aspect that you can integrate into your threat detection strategy is creating and reviewing a risk matrix to determine if a threat is adequately mitigated. So with the risk matrix, you're looking at the consequence of the specific threat and the likelihood. And as those increase, that will increase the risk. So for example, if there's a high likelihood that something is going to occur and it has a big consequence to the business, that would be a critical finding or risk, and that would be something that you would want to mitigate in a very short period of time, depending on what works best for the business. So threat detection is very interesting. There's a lot of things that you can go in here, but again, logging and monitoring is going to be very important for helping to detect these threats. And there's also some other services like AWS Macie that has machine learning integrated and essentially helps create that baseline for what's abnormal in your specific S3 buckets. So there's a lot of different aspects that you could dive into here for threat detection as well. And lastly, moving into the last pillar, incident response. So there's 4 different types of aspects when you're looking at incident response that you really want to build out when you're looking at how to respond to any type of incident that you have in your cloud environment, and again, how to mitigate those in a timely fashion. So the first aspect is you're going to want to educate all of your different security operations and incident response staff about cloud technologies and how your organization intends to use them. So what is the way to use an EC2 instance and what is abnormal when you see maybe malware, and how to prepare for that response. So preparing your different incident response teams to detect and respond to these incidents in the cloud, you're going to want to make sure that you're working with them to enable detective capabilities and ensuring that they have the appropriate access to go in and look at the logs and essentially help with whatever type of adverse event is happening. And so some things that are very helpful with this are creating run books. So looking at both manual processes and automated processes to have consistent and timely responses. You'll also want to simulate different scenarios. So let's say your team has never come across any type of adverse event. You're going to want to make sure that they're fully prepared for those. So again, expected and unexpected events within your cloud environment to understand how effective the team is and identify any gaps, so that when you do identify those gaps, you can iterate on those and essentially establish different types of controls or people processes that need to be in place essentially to reduce time and reduce any further risk that you might have. So again, in terms of incident response, some different aspects that you'd want to look at in terms of design is establishing response objectives. So working with your business stakeholders, legal, and any type of leadership that you would need to work with to determine what types of goals you need when responding to an incident. Some goals could be looking at containing the event, mitigating the issue, and also recovering any affected resources, and then also looking at forensics after the fact so that you can make sure that event does not occur again. Also looking at documenting plans. So again, looking at run books like we talked about to communicate during an event and also recover from the incident. Responding using cloud patterns. So again, making sure that you are using response patterns that are manual and automated when any type of adverse event is occurring. And also, again, understanding your cloud inventory and needs. So it's going to make it a lot more difficult to respond to an event if you don't know how many types of S3 buckets you have, or which ones have maybe sensitive data in there. So again, making sure that you know exactly what your inventory is and again, where those threats lie. And also using redeployment mechanisms. So I mentioned AWS CloudFormation, having different redeployment mechanisms in place to roll back any type of code that might be causing an adverse event and redeploying the resources with the proper configuration. Again, automation is super important, so automating where you can to reduce human risk and time to mitigate the event, and also choosing scalable solutions. So this is something that a lot of companies, when they first start out in the cloud, they might be looking at, you know, a few teams that they have, and they're not necessarily thinking about when they're growing to be a huge company in 5 to 10 years. And so making sure that you are creating runbooks and solutions that are scalable for as the business grows, so that you can still reduce time between detection and response. And lastly, learning and iterating on past failures. So at AWS, we always say that we want to fail fast and fail early. So if you know something's wrong, it's okay. We all have failures, but we want to make sure that we're detecting those early and mitigating them as quickly as possible, and that we're learning from them so that we can make sure that we're addressing any of those gaps within the processes, tools, or different people challenges that we come across. So, and another aspect, this isn't an official pillar, but I did want to add it in there, just looking at compliance. So this is an aspect that most companies have to adhere to today in terms of industry standards and regulations. So AWS compliance helps customers to understand all the different robust controls that are in place with AWS. So again, shared responsibility model, and AWS helping to protect physical infrastructure and those layers, and then what customers need to do to ensure that they're meeting compliance for their specific industries and any regulations they have to go to. One of the really good services that I always recommend people at least dive into is AWS Artifact. So this is a service that you can essentially pull up compliance related information about different AWS services, and as well as AWS data centers and how they're meeting those specific compliance regulations and controls. So here are some of the different compliance that you might come across in terms of things like HIPAA and FedRAMP, PCI, that you might need to adhere to for your company. And we also linked the AWS compliance URL there, so you can dive into that more as well. So to wrap up the pillars, essentially something that's really important to think about when you are looking at all of the different aspects is defense in depth. So if you're not familiar with that term, it's essentially a strategy that different companies use to create these multiple layers of security for holistic protection. So again, like I mentioned, if you have an S3 bucket and maybe you know, you have encryption, you have done all the IAM roles that you've needed, but the configuration's wrong, this defense in depth is really going to help your organization to reduce vulnerabilities and contain threats and mitigate risk in a timely manner. So again, this is something that you want to make sure you're looking at it as a holistic approach and not just focusing on one of the pillars, and making sure that you're applying all of them. So when it comes to your cloud security journey, you might be wondering, like, this is great, but where do I get started? I'm so interested. So for you to continue your learning, because obviously you are interested because you joined this session, and we're so glad that you joined today. So some different ways that you can continue your cloud security journey and increase your skills. So New Horizons is one of our authorized training partners. And again, we're so thankful that you invited us to speak today. And they have some great resources that you can use to get started. So we created this QR code, so feel free to scan it on your phone. So take a second to do that, and that will provide links to the New Horizons AWS trainings. So something that I always suggest when you're starting out in the cloud, we do have this link to create a self-paced learning roadmap. So this essentially provides different guides for what topics you're interested in. So we have one in security. And when it comes to having an advantage over other candidates, the AWS certifications are always a great way to get started, and also to build your confidence as you're learning more about cloud security or cloud fundamentals. There is the AWS Cloud Practitioner certification, and that is a great one to get started because it's really the cloud foundationals. It's not a technical certification, and it helps, again, just boost your confidence as you go into the other ones. But again, New Horizons has some amazing trainings that you can access to make sure that you are continuing your cloud security skills, and New Horizons always keeping up to date with the new aspects of security and the different learnings of the certification. So again, make sure you take a quick snapshot of that QR code and it will lead you to all the trainings that they have there. And another aspect too, AWS is always hiring. We're hiring so many security professionals. So again, from security engineers to consultants, architects, technical account managers. You can find different jobs on jobfinder.amazon.com. And my number one tips are do not wait until you feel like you're a cloud expert. Many of the roles actually do not require cloud experience. So make sure you look and see if you have about 40 to 60% of the basic job qualifications, definitely go ahead and apply. We're mainly looking for people who are really interested in learning and being curious about security. So as you're applying those skills and learning your certifications, definitely use that as an advantage to get your foot in the door. So again, please apply if you're interested. We always want more people. And so some call to actions for everyone. So we, again, want to make sure that you have tangible actions for what to do after this session to continue your learning. So some suggestions for you for call to action. You could take the free 15-minute security awareness training that Bill mentioned that AWS created in partnership with the Biden administration to ensure that everyone is continuing their security awareness and keeping up to date with their training. So that's a quick and easy call to action that everyone could take. The next one is reading some white papers that we have and signing up for New Horizons training classes. And then also, if you feel like you've taken some training and you're ready for the next step, you could schedule your AWS certification exam. And then lastly, if you are more advanced in your security journey, another call to action could be building automation. So people, I didn't rephrase that last part right, but essentially building automation to help reduce the risk that people cannot create security issues. So a quick poll. Which action are you going to commit to today? So again, feel free to choose whichever one, but make sure that you actually follow through. That's important. And it's great that you joined the session today. And we want to make sure that you're continuing your learning. So take a quick second to answer the poll. And then also, if anyone has any questions, we'll open the Q&A in just a moment. So feel free to either raise your hand or add questions into the chat.
Give that a few more
Thanks, Bill.
seconds for those folks to respond and see how we did. Wow. So 67% said they'll take the security awareness training. 33% said they'll schedule an AWS security certification exam. That's pretty good. That's,
Awesome.
good for everybody for attending. So yeah, awesome.
Great. Yeah, and I'll also add that link into the chat in just a moment. But thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Bill and I were so excited to speak to you today, and thank you for New Horizons for inviting us. And now we will open it up to any questions that you might have.
Well, thank you so much, Bill and Sarah. We really do appreciate it. And as Sarah mentioned, if you do have questions, please do take a minute to type them into the questions box, and I'll be reading them off shortly. Also, if anybody's interested in the material presented in this webinar, or if you have questions regarding available course offerings, please contact your local New Horizons Center for further information. You can log on to newhorizons.com and do a zip code search, and it'll show you the center nearest you. And our webinar schedule is also up to date on our website, again, newhorizons.com. Just click on the webinars link to view the full schedule, and you can register for any upcoming sessions. And a friendly reminder, because this has come up, we will be sending out the recording link to today's webinar later today. So we do have a question that came in. The first one is, so would the foundational course be a good starting point?
Yes, so New Horizons has a bunch of foundational courses. There's also the 15-minute one is a good one, but it's mainly just basics. So for certifications, you're going to want to do one of the certification trainings that's going to have more in-depth information, but I definitely suggest the cloud practitioner one. the certification as a first step, because it's really going to help you build on the solutions architect associate. So that's definitely a good starting place, because that one was built for anyone who's interested in cloud. It's not necessarily technical. So that is definitely a good place to start.
Great, that leads right into the second question we have, which is someone's asking about that Cloud Practitioner Essentials course and certification. What's the typical time requirement for training to get into an entry-level cloud role?
I think a lot of the skills that you may have in IT in general, information technology, networking, storage, databases, computer, they're applicable to the cloud, right? I think the fundamentals class is not a huge lift. I think it's in order of hours probably for basic introductions. It's really about understanding the value proposition of cloud and why people are migrating their businesses to cloud services. So some of the cost advantages, the agility advantages, the ability to innovate quickly, pay-as-you-go pricing, some of the fundamental changes in the way that IT is procured. We'll get you familiar with that, but I don't think it's a big lift.
Great, thank you. And how will AWS help us if we do fall victim to a cybersecurity attack? Are there procedures, policies, helpful tools in place?
Yeah, certainly the services we make available today, over 25 security services help folks configure their cloud resources correctly. They also help you manage incidents, things like Systems Manager, Incident Manager, Guard Duty, Security Hub. All of our services help customers understand, have visibility into security issues and help remediate those issues. Certainly every AWS customer has an account team, and they should contact their account team or contact support if they're having what they think is an ongoing security issue, and we can guide you from there.
Great, I've got two that are kind of related, so I'll ask them together. One is, what makes AWS superior to its competitors? What sets you apart? And is there one particularly cool or interesting feature of AWS that you really like?
Sure, I can take the first one. Maybe Sarah can take the second one. I think the benefit of AWS is the breadth of our services. We've been at this for going on 16, 17 years now. We have over 200 fully established services, everything from databases to compute to robotics to machine learning to storage, anything to gaming to media streaming, industry vertical solutions for automotive and healthcare. The breadth of services is really, I think, the key differentiator. There's no replacement for experience. We've been doing cloud services longer than the industry, and we think that we have strong availability, security, and a huge partner ecosystem, both in the training space, the solution integration space, the technology partner space. I think that breadth of partner ecosystem, as well as the breadth of services, I think differentiates us. Sarah, you want to take what's your interesting thing of the day?
Yeah, I know. I was like, there's so many. Well, first off, if you haven't heard of AWS reInvent, it's AWS's big annual conference where they talk about all the different services and features. So I definitely suggest checking out the blog, because there's so many new launches of either new services or new features that customers have asked for. Something that's cool, I think, in my mind, just with AWS, is that 90% of our new features and services come from customer feedback. We take customer feedback very seriously. So if you see something in AWS that you're like, it would be really cool to have that, definitely there's up at the top, you can reach out to support and suggest that. But in terms of services and features, personally, my favorite service is AWS Config. As a security person, I just really like it. And I've implemented a lot with different customers, because I work with a lot of very highly regulated customers. So using AWS Config, which essentially is a service that looks at your configuration of services and then looks at your security controls that you have in place and if they are compliant or non-compliant. And then you can also connect that to different services like Security Hub, AWS Detective, things like that. So that's one of my favorite features, because you can also add automation and remediate those as they find them to be non-compliant.
That is really wonderful. I also like that you take the feedback from folks and use those as suggestions. That's wonderful. I noticed from the clock that we're out of time, so I do want to thank you both for speaking today. It's been really helpful, really enjoyable, and thank you to the folks that attended. We really do appreciate your time.
Thank you all very much. Really appreciate it.